The neon lights of McPherson's pub cast a harsh glow across Sergeant Michael Reynolds' face as he nursed his third scotch. 20 years of law enforcement experience weighed heavily on his shoulders, but tonight felt different. The week had been particularly grueling. 3 domestic disturbance calls, a tragic car accident involving a family, and endless paperwork that seemed to multiply on his desk. Sarah, the veteran bartender who had served Detroit's finest for over a decade, noticed the subtle changes in Reynolds' demeanor throughout the evening. His usually sharp blue eyes appeared clouded, his typically neat uniform shirt was wrinkled, and his badge, always polished to perfection, showed smudges from nervous fidgeting. "Maybe switch to water, Mike," Sarah suggested, sliding a glass toward him. Her voice carried the warmth of someone who had watched countless officers navigate their difficult nights. Reynolds pushed the water aside, his wedding ring catching the light, a reminder of his recent separation. The pub buzzed with the usual Friday night energy, young professionals unwinding, college students celebrating the end of midterms, and a few off-duty officers sharing stories in the corner. At the other end of the bar, James Chen, a rookie officer who had recently transferred from Chicago, watched his superior with growing concern. He had always admired Reynolds' dedication to mentoring new officers, remembering how the sergeant had helped him navigate his first high-speed pursuit just 3 months ago. The night shifted when a group of investment bankers entered, their laughter cutting through the ambient chatter. They were celebrating a successful merger, their spirits high and voices higher. One of them bumped into Reynolds while gesturing animatedly about market projections. The surgeon's scotch glass tipped, amber liquid seeping into his shirt. In that moment, something snapped. The accumulated stress of recent months, the separation, the mounting pressures at work, the feelings of isolation, crystallized into a single moment of lost control. What happened next would be captured on 12 different phones, each recording from a slightly different angle. Reynolds' voice, usually measured and professional, rose above the music. His words, sharp and uncharacteristic, silenced the pub. The investment banker, a recent Detroit transplant named Michael Wong, stepped back, his celebration forgotten. Officer Chen moved quickly, recognizing the danger signs. "Sarge," he said firmly, placing a hand on Reynolds' shoulder. "Let's get some air." But it was too late. The damage was done. Around the pub, phones lowered slowly, their owners looking at each other with mixed expressions of shock and disappointment. Sarah stood frozen, the water pitcher still in her hand, watching a good man's career potentially unravel in real time. The next morning, Reynolds sat on the edge of his bed in his sparsely furnished apartment, his phone vibrating incessantly. The first video had already gathered 50,000 views. His inbox filled with messages from fellow officers, ranging from support to disbelief. A text from Chief Martinez simply read, "My office, 8 a.m." In his bathroom mirror, Reynolds hardly recognized himself. 20 years of building trust, mentoring young officers, and serving his community, all potentially undone in 3 minutes of unfiltered anger. His hands trembled as he adjusted his badge, the morning sun catching its surface, revealing every imperfection he'd allowed to accumulate. A call came in from his ex-wife, Emily. He let it go to voicemail, knowing she had probably seen the video too. As he headed for his car, Reynolds realized that the hardest part wasn't facing the chief or the department's investigation. It was confronting the truth about himself that last night had finally forced into the light. Chief Sarah Martinez arrived at her office at 6:30 a.m., 2 hours earlier than her scheduled meeting with Reynolds. The early morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across her desk where 3 computer monitors displayed different angles of last night's incident. She pressed pause, rubbing her temples. 25 years ago, she'd started as a rookie officer walking the same beats as Reynolds. Now, as Detroit's first female police chief, every decision she made carried the weight of precedent. Her phone buzzed. Another message from the police commissioner requesting an update. "Coffee, Chief." Detective Lisa Morgan stood in the doorway, 2 steaming cups in hand. As Martinez's most trusted advisor, she could read the concern etched across her superior's face. "Thanks, Lisa. Have you seen the personnel file I requested?" Morgan placed a thick folder on the desk. "Everything's there. Performance reviews, commendations, complaints. There's something else you should see." She pulled out a sealed envelope. "This arrived last month but got buried during the budget meetings." Martinez opened the envelope, revealing a handwritten letter from a young officer Reynolds had mentored. It detailed how the sergeant had helped him through a particularly difficult domestic violence case, even paying for counseling sessions out of his own pocket. The contrast between this act of kindness and last night's video made her chest tighten. She opened Reynolds' file, spreading out 2 decades of service across her desk. The highlights were impressive: 4 life-saving awards, countless commendations, and a stack of thank-you letters from community members. But there were also warning signs she couldn't ignore. Subtle at first, then more pronounced over the past year. His divorce hit him hard, Morgan commented, pointing to a series of recent reports. Started missing department mandatory counseling sessions, working double shifts. Martinez stood, walking to the window overlooking the city she'd sworn to protect. The morning traffic moved below, citizens heading to work, trusting their police department to make the right decisions. Her reflection stared back at her, the gold stars on her collar representing not just authority, but responsibility. Her computer chimed with an email from the department's legal team. They recommended immediate termination, citing liability concerns. The police union representative had also called twice, reminding her of Reynolds' rights under the collective bargaining agreement. "What time did you tell them to come in?" Morgan asked, gathering the scattered papers. 8. Martinez checked her watch. "Let's pull the body cam footage from his last 3 months of shifts. I want to see if there's a pattern we missed." The next hour passed in focused silence as they reviewed footage. Reynolds remained professional in his recorded interactions, but there were moments. A tightened jaw here, a sharp word there, that suggested a pressure building beneath the surface. At 7:55, Martinez's secretary announced Reynolds' arrival. He was early, another habit from his exemplary years of service. Through the glass walls of her office, she could see him waiting, ramrod straight in his pressed uniform, yet somehow diminished. "Whatever you decide," Morgan said quietly, heading for the door, "it's going to set a precedent." Martinez nodded, squaring her shoulders. She had climbed the ranks by making tough decisions, by seeing the bigger picture while never forgetting the human element. Today would test that balance like never before. She pressed the intercom. "Send him in." As Reynolds entered, she noticed something that hadn't been visible in the video from last night. A profound exhaustion in his eyes that spoke of battles fought long before he stepped into that bar. Emily Reynolds parked her Honda Civic in the courthouse parking structure, choosing a spot far from the entrance where she could gather her thoughts. The manila envelope on the passenger seat seemed to carry its own gravity, pulling at her conscience. Inside were photographs, text messages, and a decade's worth of carefully dated journal entries, the silent witnesses to her marriage's decline. Through her windshield, she watched as attorneys and court staff hurried past, their briefcases swinging in rhythm. 5 years of teaching 4th grade had taught her the importance of timing, of knowing when a student needed help even before they raised their hand. Now, that same instinct told her it was time to speak up. Her phone lit up with another news notification about Michael's incident at McPherson's. The comments section overflowed with judgment from strangers who didn't know the whole story. Emily touched the screen, remembering when she first met Michael at the police academy graduation. He'd been different then. Eyes bright with purpose, smile genuine, dreams uncomplicated. "Mrs. Reynolds." A text from one of her students' parents popped up, asking about tomorrow's science project. The normality of it made her laugh softly. Here she sat, about to potentially reshape the department's approach to officer wellness, while somewhere across town, papier-mâché solar systems waited for her attention. She picked up the envelope, fingers tracing the edges of the hospital discharge papers from 3 years ago. The official record read accidental fall, But the truth lay in the pages of her journal, in the way she documented his gradual transformation after a series of traumatic calls. A child's death, a brutal domestic violence case, a shootout that left his partner wounded. Opening her glove compartment, Emily pulled out a photograph she hadn't included in the envelope. It showed Michael at a department picnic, surrounded by rookie officers he'd mentored, his arm around her shoulders. The date on the back read just 8 months ago. Even then, she'd seen the strain behind his smile, had felt him pulling away, retreating into silence and long hours at work. A knock on her window startled her. Lisa Morgan, a detective she'd known since her marriage, stood outside with 2 coffee cups. "Thought I might find you here," Lisa said as Emily rolled down the window. "Brought your favorite, vanilla latte, extra shot." Emily accepted the coffee, grateful for its warmth. "Am I doing the right thing, Lisa?" The detective leaned against the car, her expression thoughtful. "You're not here for revenge. That matters." "I keep thinking about his rookies," Emily said, "about the officers who look up to him. Maybe if someone had noticed sooner, had pushed harder for help." "That's exactly why these records matter," Lisa replied. "The department needs to understand that supporting officers means supporting their families too. Your documentation could help create real change." Emily's phone buzzed again, Chief Martinez's office confirming their afternoon appointment. She thought about her students, how she taught them that courage sometimes meant asking for help, that strength could mean admitting when something was broken. Taking a deep breath, she gathered the envelope and her coffee. The courthouse loomed ahead, its stone facade catching the morning light. As she walked toward the entrance, Emily remembered something she always told her students. "We don't speak up to tear down, but to build up. We don't point out problems without helping to find solutions." Her heels clicked against the polished floor of the courthouse lobby, each step more certain than the last. This wasn't about punishment or exposing secrets. It was about breaking the cycle, about ensuring other officers and their families wouldn't have to maintain the same painful silence she had kept for so long. Detective James Chen sat in interview room 3, his laptop open to a blank document. On the wall, the clock ticked past 2 p.m., marking his 6th hour of conducting interviews with officers who had worked alongside Reynolds. The picture emerging was far more complex than the viral video suggested. "He saved my life. You know," Officer Maria Suarez said, fidgeting with her water bottle. As a rookie 2 years ago, she'd been partnered with Reynolds for field training. "We were responding to what seemed like a routine call. Sarge noticed something off about the situation. Just little details most would miss. His instincts got us both home that night." Chen nodded, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Through the one-way glass, he could see his partner organizing photographs from Reynolds' past cases, 15 years of service captured in crime scene photos, commendations, and team pictures told a story of dedication and excellence. "When did you first notice changes in his behavior?" Chen asked, keeping his tone neutral. Suarez's expression shifted. It was subtle at first. "Remember that school shooting we prevented last spring? Reynolds coordinated everything perfectly. Evacuation, tactical response, all of it. Saved hundreds of kids. But afterward," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "he stopped coming to our weekly team dinners, started taking extra shifts in the worst neighborhoods. It was like he couldn't turn off anymore." The door opened, and Sergeant Tom O'Malley, a 30-year veteran, stepped in. His presence filled the small room with an air of old-school authority. "You asking about Mike?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Let me tell you something about Reynolds that's not in any file." Chen gestured to the empty chair, and O'Malley settled in with a grunt. 3 months ago, I found him in the locker room at 3 a.m. He'd just talked a teenager down from jumping off the Ambassador Bridge. Kid's father had lost his job. Mother was sick. Whole family was falling apart. Mike sat with that boy for 4 hours in the cold. Then he came back here and donated half his overtime pay to the family, anonymously. Making notes, Chen thought about the contrast between these stories and the man he'd seen in the bar video. Would you say job stress was a factor in his recent behavior? O'Malley leaned forward. We're all stressed, Detective. But Mike, he took every case personally, kept files of unsolved cases in his car, studied them on breaks. Last month, he closed a 5-year-old cold case while officially off duty, found a missing girl, reunited her with her family. Never put in for the overtime. A knock at the door interrupted them. Chen's partner entered with a stack of performance reviews. You need to see these, she said, spreading them across the table. The latest evaluations showed subtle declines in interpersonal scores, contrasting sharply with outstanding tactical and investigative ratings. He was the best mentor I ever had. Suarez added softly. Taught me that being a good cop meant being human first. Said if we ever lost that, we'd lose everything that mattered about the job. Chen closed his laptop, the weight of what he'd learned settling on his shoulders. The case wasn't just about one night in a bar. It was about a dedicated officer's gradual transformation, about the toll of carrying others' tragedies without addressing his own. Outside the interview room, the precinct hummed with activity. Chen watched through the window as a new shift arrived. Officers checking equipment and sharing information. Somewhere in those daily routines lay the key to preventing similar situations. The question wasn't just what had happened to Reynolds, but what they could learn from it to protect others wearing the badge. Reynolds found himself at Jefferson Avenue Park at dawn, 3 days after the incident. The department had placed him on administrative leave, and sleepless nights had become his new normal. He sat on a bench overlooking the Detroit River, watching freight ships slide silently across the water, their running lights bright against the fading darkness. A paper coffee cup landed beside him, startling him from his thoughts. Still take it black. The voice belonged to retired Lieutenant Marcus Freeman, his first supervisor from 20 years ago. At 70, Freeman's hair had gone completely white, but his eyes retained their characteristic intensity. Reynolds stared at the cup, then at his former mentor. How did you know I'd be here? Freeman lowered himself onto the bench, his movements deliberate with age. Because 25 years ago, after my own incident, this is where I came. He gestured toward the river. Something about moving water helps clear the mind. The morning joggers passed by, their rhythmic footfalls mixing with the sound of waves lapping against the shore. Reynolds had heard rumors about Freeman's past, a decorated officer who'd nearly lost everything before turning his life around. But they'd never discussed it. The video. Reynolds started, but Freeman held up a hand. I saw it. Reminds me of the night I pulled my gun on a teenager who was just reaching for his wallet. Nearly ended my career. Freeman sipped his coffee. But that's not really what we're here to talk about, is it? Reynolds gripped his cup tighter, feeling the warmth seep into his fingers. I don't even recognize myself anymore, Marcus. Every call, every case, they all stay with me. That couple at the bar, they didn't deserve what I said. But in that moment, he trailed off, unable to finish. You know what I see when I look at you? Freeman asked, watching a seagull dive toward the water. I see an officer who spent so long being strong for others that he forgot how to be human for himself. The job asks us to be heroes, but it doesn't teach us how to handle the weight of that badge when we're alone. A group of dock workers changed shifts in the distance, their voices carrying across the water. Reynolds thought about all the shift changes he'd seen, the faces of officers he'd trained, the victims he'd helped, and the ones he couldn't save. After my incident, Freeman continued, I found help in an unexpected place. There's a first responder support group that meets at the community center on Tuesdays. No uniforms, no ranks, just people trying to find their way back. I'm not sure I can come back from this one, Reynolds admitted. Freeman turned to face him fully. When I was at my lowest, a wise woman told me something I never forgot. The measure of a person isn't in never falling. It's in how they use that fall to help others rise. Your story isn't over, Mike. It's just taking a turn you didn't expect. The sun had fully risen now, painting the river in shades of gold. Reynolds watched as a family arrived at the park, their young daughter chasing pigeons while her parents set up a breakfast picnic. The scene reminded him of why he'd joined the force in the first place, to protect moments like these. "The first meeting is tonight," Freeman said, standing slowly. 7 o'clock. "I'll save you a seat." He placed a business card on the bench with an address written on the back. As Freeman walked away, Reynolds picked up the card. For the first time in months, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Not for an easy fix or a quick return to normal, but for the possibility of transformation, of turning this moment into something meaningful. Chief Martinez stood before the police commission in the City Hall's main chamber, her presentation slides reflecting off the polished wood panels. The room was packed. Officers, community leaders, and media representatives all waiting to hear her proposed changes to departmental policy. "What happened last week wasn't just about one officer," she began, her voice steady. "It was a wake-up call about the support systems we need that haven't built." She clicked to the next slide, revealing statistics on officer stress, family impact, and community trust. In the third row, Reynolds sat in civilian clothes, his presence requested by Martinez herself. Next to him, Emily sat straight-backed, her teaching notebook open. They weren't back together, but they'd found common ground in supporting the chief's initiative. "Today, I'm announcing the formation of the Officer Wellness and Community Bridge Program," Martinez continued. "This isn't just another mandatory counseling requirement. This is a complete reimagining of how we support our officers and connect them with the communities they serve." The screen displayed the program's 3 pillars: mental health support, family resources, and community engagement. Reynolds noticed several elements that seemed inspired by his own experience, including family inclusion in counseling sessions and a mentor system for officers showing signs of stress. Detective Chen, sitting near the back, watched the commissioner's reactions. Some nodded appreciatively, while others frowned at the budget implications. He thought about all the interviews he'd conducted, how many officers had privately admitted to struggling with similar issues. "We're partnering with local mental health professionals who specialize in first responder trauma," Martinez explained. "But we're going further. We're creating regular community dialogue sessions where officers can connect with residents outside of crisis situations. Understanding grows in both directions." She paused, making eye contact with Reynolds. "We're also establishing a peer support network, led by officers who have faced their own challenges and emerged stronger. Their experiences will help others recognize warning signs and seek help before reaching a breaking point." In the audience, retired Lieutenant Freeman smiled slightly. The program incorporated many elements he'd suggested during his long conversation with the chief last week. His own journey from crisis to recovery had helped shape this new approach. The cost of implementing this program, Martinez addressed the budget concerns directly, is far less than the cost of losing experienced officers to burnout, or worse, losing community trust through preventable incidents. Emily wrote rapidly in her notebook. As an educator, she recognized elements of successful intervention strategies she used with struggling students. The program wouldn't just help officers, it would support their families too. "Officer Reynolds," Martinez's voice carried across the chamber, "would you please stand?" The room hushed as Reynolds rose slowly. "Sergeant Reynolds has agreed to help develop our peer support training, turning his experience into a foundation for helping others." Reynolds felt dozens of eyes on him, but for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel shame. He saw understanding in those faces, recognition of shared struggles, and hope for better ways forward. "This program isn't just about preventing incidents," Martinez concluded. "It's about strengthening the entire fabric of police-community relations. When our officers are supported, when they have tools to process trauma and stress, they can better serve and protect our community." As the presentation ended, the chamber filled with thoughtful discussion. Reynolds watched as officers approached Emily, sharing their own family struggles and appreciating her courage in speaking up. Detective Chen exchanged knowing looks with Martinez, Their investigations had helped shape this moment of change. Outside the chamber windows, Detroit continued its daily rhythm. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. A new path forward had opened, one that acknowledged both human frailty and the potential for growth, understanding, and redemption. The morning sun streamed through Dr. Marcus Thompson's office windows, casting warm light on the degrees and certifications that lined the walls. Reynolds sat in the oversized leather chair, his third session in 2 weeks, watching dust motes dance in the sunbeams. "You mentioned something interesting last time," Dr. Thompson said, his voice carrying the gentle authority of 20 years counseling first responders. "About the night that changed everything. You said it wasn't really about what happened at the bar." Reynolds shifted, his civilian clothes still feeling strange after years in uniform. "I've been thinking about that. It was like watching a dam break, but the cracks had been forming for years." Dr. Thompson nodded, making a brief note. On his desk sat a framed photo of his own days as a paramedic, before he'd switched careers to help those who helped others. "Tell me about the cracks." Last week, in group therapy, another officer shared a story about losing a child on the job. Reynolds paused, gathering his thoughts. It brought back memories of the Martinez case, the 5-year-old we couldn't save. I used to tell myself these things didn't affect me, that compartmentalizing was strength. Through the window, they could hear kids playing in the park across the street. Their laughter floated up, a reminder of the world they worked to protect. "Emily came to the department meeting yesterday," Reynolds continued. "She's helping design the family support portion of the new program. Seeing her there, using our story to prevent others from going through the same thing, it made me realize how much I'd pushed away the people trying to help." Dr. Thompson leaned forward slightly. "And how did that make you feel?" "Proud of her. Ashamed it took this long. But mostly," Reynolds searched for the right words, "hopeful. For the first time in years, I feel hopeful." The session continued, touching on coping mechanisms, stress management techniques, and the importance of maintaining connections. As they wrapped up, Dr. Thompson shared a new perspective on strength that resonated deeply with Reynolds' experience. Later that afternoon, Reynolds stood before a room of cadets at the academy. Chief Martinez had asked him to share his story as part of their training. The nervous energy in the room reminded him of his own academy days, when everything seemed black and white. "The badge is heavy," he began, his voice steady. "Not the physical weight, but what it represents. The responsibility, the expectations, the lives we touch. I'm here to tell you it's okay to acknowledge that weight." Young faces looked back at him, some curious, others uncertain. In the back of the room, he spotted Detective Chen and Emily, both there to support this moment of vulnerability turned into education. "There's an old saying in law enforcement, 'We take care of our own,'" Reynolds continued. "But sometimes taking care requires admitting when we're not okay. Real strength isn't in being unbreakable. It's in knowing when to reach out, when to lean on others, when to say we need help." As he shared his journey, the gradual isolation, the weight of untreated trauma, the cost to his personal life, and finally, the path to recovery, he saw recognition in some eyes, relief in others. These future officers wouldn't just learn from his mistakes, they'd enter the force knowing it was okay to be human. "The department's new programs aren't just safety nets," he concluded. "They're bridges between who we are and who we serve, between the weight we carry and the support we need, between our strongest and most vulnerable moments." The silence that followed felt different from the heavy silences he carried for years. This one held possibility, understanding, and the promise of change. 6 months after the incident at McPherson's pub, the Detroit Police Department's community center buzzed with activity. The grand opening of the Officer Wellness and Family Support Wing drew a diverse crowd. Officers, family members, community leaders, and mental health professionals, all mingling in the newly renovated space. Reynolds stood near the entrance, adjusting his name tag that read Peer Support Coordinator. The position was new, created as part of Chief Martinez's reforms, and it fit him better than he'd expected. His office, just down the hall, had 2 doors, one for officers seeking help, another for family members reaching out for support. The renovation turned out well, Emily said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. She'd taken a part-time role consulting on the family support programs while continuing her teaching career. Their relationship had evolved into something different, not romantic partners anymore, but allies in creating change. "Remember what you told me during our first group session?" Reynolds accepted the coffee. "About how change doesn't happen in isolation." Before Emily could respond, Officer Maria Suarez appeared with a young couple, new recruits and their spouses, judging by their nervous expressions. "Sarge, got a minute? They have questions about the family preparation workshops." Reynolds gestured toward his office, catching sight of Detective Chen across the room. The detective was demonstrating the new department wellness app to a group of senior officers, his investigation months ago having helped shape many of the program's features. Inside his office, Reynolds settled behind a desk decorated with both professional awards and children's drawings, artwork from officers' kids who'd participated in the family sessions. The young couple sat close together, their body language revealing both anxiety and hope. "First thing you should know," Reynolds began, "is that strength isn't about carrying weight alone. It's about building support systems before you need them." As he outlined the department's new programs, regular check-ins, family counseling, stress management workshops, he noticed the tension in their shoulders gradually easing. These were the conversations he wished someone had had with him 20 years ago. Later that afternoon, Chief Martinez delivered her address in the main hall. Reynolds stood at the back, watching as she highlighted the program's early successes: decreased stress-related incidents, improved officer retention, and strengthening community relations. 6 months ago, Martinez said, we faced a choice between clinging to old patterns or embracing change. Today, we're seeing the results of choosing growth over comfort, understanding over judgment, and prevention over reaction. Reynolds felt a hand on his shoulder. Lieutenant Freeman, who'd become a regular presence at the center. "Quite different from our morning by the river, isn't it?" the older man said quietly. The ceremony concluded with a ribbon cutting, but it was what happened afterward that truly marked the day's significance. Officers who'd once hidden their struggles now spoke openly with counselors. Family members exchanged contact information, forming support networks. Rookie officers consulted with veterans about balancing duty and self-care. As the evening wound down, Reynolds found himself back in his office, updating the peer support schedule for the coming week. A photo on his desk caught his eye. The entire department gathered on the steps of headquarters, taken just last week. Unlike the stiff, formal photos of years past, this one showed genuine smiles, comfortable poses, a family rather than just a force. His phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Thompson. "Ready for tomorrow's group session. Your story helps more than you know." Reynolds looked out his window at the setting sun painting the Detroit skyline in shades of promise. The weight of his badge felt different now, not lighter, perhaps, but balanced by the strength of the connections he'd built, the understanding he'd gained, and the changes he'd helped create. The incident that had nearly ended his career had instead transformed it, rippling outward to touch countless other lives. In helping others find their way forward, he'd found his own path to healing.